When you think of video game companies, you think of three companies: Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. Regardless of what you think of these companies, these are the three that have built the standard. But in this series alone, we've talked about more than just Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft. We've also talked about companies like Sega and Rareware. But regardless of all the companies that we've seen, none of them have the distinction of being the first. There was a company before them all that revolutionized the gaming sphere in a way that the other companies don't just have it. Unfortunately, they became a lost leader afterwards, and their story is one that's been marred in nothing but issues afterwards with all of it. A company that started out so as the biggest companies ever and started as a promising light. But afterwards, they seem to just go downhill afterwards. And that one company is Atari. And today, on this episode of the Great Nolan Film Podcast, we're going to look into the history of Atari. Greetings, everybody. I'm going to House 45, House 45. We're doing the Great Nolan Film Podcast, and this is the history, this is the rise and fall of Atari.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em.
It's showtime.
Everyone's mad.
Our story begins with a man named Nolan Bushnell. Born on February 5th, 1943 in Clearfield, Utah, his life wouldn't begin until he started studying at the University of Utah as he worked a part-time job at an amusement arcade. We became familiar with the arcade electromechanical games. Bushnell watched customers play and maintain machinery while learning how to work it. In 1968, he graduated that year and wanted to be hired at Disney. However, Disney was not interested in hiring him, so instead he was asked to work at a company called Ampex. And Ampex met a fellow employee named Ted Dabney, due to have a common interest. Bushnell shared the idea of creating a pizza parlors with electronic games. With Dabney, took the labs. 1970, Dabney they went inside to finally start making a company with the first company and called it Syzygy. And yes, people, this is how it's spelt. Yeah, I know, terrible name. And it was built by a company called, and they created the first game, Computer Space. Unfortunately, both wouldn't work out. Computer Space, the video game arcade business was still brand new. Companies, and this Computer Space was developed in the 1962 computer game Space War, which is probably one of, if not the first video games ever. It was housed in a blue fiberglass containment unit, similar to making it look futuristic. And so after being designed in 1971, the company wanted to get it out in 1972, in June time. However, it didn't seem to work out well enough. The current operation of Space War was just too complicated for gamers to learn. It didn't really wow people as much as they thought it would. It was too bulky, too unwieldy, and just too odd for people just to learn. Not only that, but it just didn't come appealing as Computer Space. They unfortunately had Computer Space didn't sell well. Not only that, but they found another issue. The name Sister G was already taken, meaning that they could not use their own name in the company basis. They had learned that it was actually a candle-making company based in Medicinal, California, which is just hilarious. Like, imagine if, for example, we had Microsoft now, and Microsoft tried to change the name, and then Microsoft found out the name was owned by a jacket making company out of Illinois. That's just hilarious. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. They instead want names. They had a whole list of names, several to go by. Okay. Alright. So taking a look at the names, they picked what they ultimately thought was the third name, Atari. Atari was actually something they learned in the game Go. And Atari is sort of like a check-like position in the game, where you would take all the pieces and call it Atari in it. Bushnell had also Go as his favorite game. As for the they rented the first office in Scott Boulevard in Sunnydale, California when they first made it as their first offices. According to 1972, Bushnell had seen a demonstration of a new console called the Magnavox Odyssey 2. According to Alcorn, Bushnell decided to have a produced an arcade version of the tennis game. What was that game then learned me on? Well, that game was soon to be learned to be Pong. After Sister G's failed attempts with computer space, it was unsure how they would do with video games. Again, so they developed Pong to be simple. Well, according to another gentleman, Alan Alcorn, had another person named Alan Alcorn to help brand it. Dabby and previously working at Atari, Alcorn had no experience working on video games. So he accumulated Alcorn creating video games. Bushnell gave him a project secretly meant to warm up exercise. Bushnell told Alcorn that he had a contract with General Electronic Computers. Alcorn was also however claimed it was in direct response to that he was said that he was going to make more games and was ready for it. But in 2011, Bushnell stated that it was based on an electronic tennis game made in 1964 while attending college. However, Alcorn was saying it was a direct response to the Magnavox Odyssey tennis game. Magnavox Odyssey was the first ever video game console released back in 1972. The control was rather simple and primitive. It was sold only in Magnavox stores. The controller was usually just a box with wooden dials on it, and you put these overlays on your TV to play the games. Magnavox Odyssey wasn't complex enough to make it. Next, Alcorn first examined Bushnell's schematics for computer space and found it to be illegible. He created his own design based on the transistor logic and Bushnell's game. Feeling that both were just too boring, Bushnell added some in game more appeal. He made the paddles into 8 segments to change the ball's angle and direction. For example, if you move the ball at a 90-degree angle, it would move and position the paddles, making it much more simple and more exhilarating movement. Even though the game was simple, 3 months later in development, Bushnell and told Alcorn that he wanted the game to feature futuristic sound effects and a roaring crowd. Dabney wanted the game to have a boo and hiss that would play a lot around. Alcorn had limited sound available for necessary electronics and also wasn't aware that create certain sounds with digital circuits. At 6:15, he used tones. They constructed a prototype black and white television set for a local arcade. He had a 4-foot cabinet and had a game release. First, the game was released well in the first minutes. But what's problem with Pong is that because of it being one of the very first games ever, most companies actually wanted to make it for home. The home Pong consoles came home a lot earlier. In the as themselves, every home area made at least one Pong home console. So in fact, Bushnell contacted Sears about to Sears after coming across Magnavox in the sporting section, and said he can help sell some of their own Pong consoles at home, but would redress engineer it in the same ways. Lean to build a prototype and type tips. While at the show, they met Quinn. A few days later, they set a meeting with one of the manufacturers, Tom Quinn, who expected a deep and exclusive deal with him. Quinn, such as Atari Game the game to games such as Chicago, Alcon and Lincoln traveled to the Sears Tower, and despite a technical connection with the antenna, the broadcast making the game, they all agreed to do so and agreed to make the game work out well. However, the only thing he couldn't avoid was a lawsuit by Magnavox, who eventually said that who sued them that year for copyright infringement at the same time. Considering both options, they found out that the Pong was not a rip-off of the tennis game. Ralph Baer and Bushnell settled out of court, and they continued on afterwards. Atari can't produce fast enough, but they were able to get out. And were able to make the next set of innovations come natural to them. Around 1973, Bushnell began to expand the company and moved the company to Los Gatos, California, from the area. Bushnell also contracted graphic designer Greg Opperman who ran a design firm to create a logo for Atari. He wanted something that would become eye-catching for Atari. With the success of Pong on the way, they made sure that they wanted the logo to be something like an A shape. The first logo design was just a simple word Atari. However, the logo soon came on the arcade game Space Race. It had a resemblance to the two known as the Fuji, due to its resemblance of Mount Fuji. Atari hired Opperman to establish the company's own original design afterwards. From late 1972 to early 1973, a rift between Bushnell and Dabney began to develop. Dabney had been pushed aside by Bushnell, who saw Dabney as such a roadblock for larger plans. By March 1973, Dabney formally left Atari, selling his portion of the company for $2,500. In 1973, Atari acquired Cyan Engineering, a computer company founded by Steve Mayer and Larry Emmons. Following a consulting contract with Atari, Bushnell established a International Grass Valley think tank at Cyan to promote the company in place. Atari also spawned a second competitor called Key Games, headed by Bushnell and next-door neighbor Joe Keaton, to consecutive pinball games. Both Atari and Key can market virtually anyone. Key was led by other Atari employees, Steve Burslow and Bill White and Gil Williams. While Key companies would copy Atari's games, which used to be in 1974. Atari began to see financial struggles and was forced to lay off staff. Atari was facing increasing competition from the new arcade games out there. The kind of mistake was that after the Pong, companies were making clones of Pong. The news of making Pong is that other companies want to take that formula and want to milk it for all it's worth. Ron Gordon, who established Times, he learned Atari's problem with marketplace and tried to introduce himself to Bushnell to help out. Bushnell said about this whole area, said this: we didn't realize that Japan was a closed market, and so we were in violation of all kinds of rules and regulations of the Japanese, and they were starting to give us a real bad time. Alright. Well, they had the whole down. They came around. The first president was hired at the same time. That being John Wakefield. He believed that the company should focus on international distribution, especially Atari in Japan, Atari Pacific, and Computer Games Ltd. for Hawaii and South Korea. But those failed to give interest due to Atari's financial issues in 1994. Gordon urged Bushnell to fire Wakefield due to the financial issues. And following that, Gordon was named temporary president of Atari, management. Gordon interested that key games should be merged with Atari in 1972, just to have the release of a new game, Tank. Tank was a success in the arcades, and Atari was able to re-establish some of the financial value by 1974. In 1975, Joe Keenan was president, so was emerged. So the Atari merger, as companies merged afterwards. Having avoided bankruptcy, Atari was now ready to change things up once again. As they moved into the next movement of their own block. Before anything else, Atari wanted to have a brand was ready to tell a new thing with the first ever home console. So after the Magnavox Odyssey, a wave of other home consoles soon came in, including the Fairchild Channel F, the first home console with changeover cartridges. Coleco also had another company with the Telstar series, which, although the first Telstar was separate, as consoles conjoined, it still gained some notoriety. The workplace culture had more relaxed and invitation for being common, with multiple companies sponsored parties, including alcohol, marijuana, and hot tubs. This whole environment was there. Underblown stuff. However, they have changed things up in there. Okay? Before entering the console market, they need at least capital and home investments. However, Bushnell decided to go into public and try to sell the company to MCA or Disney, both of whom passed. And instead, 6 months later, in negotiations, Atari took the acquisition offer by Warner Brothers for $28 million. Warner Communications was then in. Bushnell remained the CEO, while Keenan remained president. Atari had roughly $40 in initial annual revenue with the home deals. But Atari also established a new headquarters in Sunnyvale, California. Now they were ready to develop the first ever console ever. They wanted to make sure the console was at least somewhat. Well, they didn't know when to get this out. Thankfully, they had time to figure it out. After being bought by Atari, they gave it more time to see how it did. A side note is that they had to figure out what games to at least feel like afterwards. Building the system, the Atari hired Joe DeCurr, a recent graduate of the University of California, to help do some testing, giving it code name Stella during testing. So, for the whole system, it was made sure to get. Bushnell had brought in Gene Landrum, a consultant who also worked with the Fairchild Channel F, to determine the consumer products. In his final report, Landrum contained the limited mistake, wood grain finish, and for the cartridges to be quote-unquote idiot-proof, child-proof, and effective in reinstating potential static problems in the environment. Landrum said including 4 or 5 dedicated games in cartridges, but that was dropped. The cartridges were designed by a man named James Archer and Douglas Hardy. Atari was still calibrated a bit more, but they were starting to get better. By 1976, they set out to Warner Brothers and began their first console, known as the Atari VCS. Yes, 2000 first games.
Attention shoppers. The new Atari cartridge game is in.
Excuse me.
Uh-oh. George again. Ooh, Atari's ASCII battle.
It comes with 27 games, but that's just for starters. You can get 9 cartridges, 187 games.
Blackjack. Oh!
I'd like an Atari.
Sorry, only our demonstrators left.
Mine!
No, George. Mine.
The new video computer system by Atari. More games, more fun.
The unit was showcased on June 4th at 1977 at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show, with plans to release in October that same year. The announcement was partially delayed to wait to see how Magnavox would settle. Well, Magnavox's lawsuit did settle in the end, and it delayed the thing from going from 19 round. Newspapers started advertising the unit in August 1977, with console launched at a price of $199, equivalent to about $1,600 to $1,060 in 2025. The joystick and the original Atari 2000 was primitive and old school by today's standards. However, it became a name in notoriety nowadays, with the whole idea engineering perfectly. Atari sold 500,000 units of the manufactured VCS at the same time. Now it's time to focus on other media that was around. They usually start off with small games, Tank and Jet Fighter, just some examples. But they're ready for a big plunge in 1978 for a new game that was coming out in the late 70s. Space Invaders was probably the most popular arcade at the time. Developed by Taito, it released in Japan, and Atari quickly wanted to scoop the rights for the game. They had even if it was small, it was a bit. Taito's Space Invaders became a huge in 7 hours. So when Atari managed to scoop the rights, Taito was asked to give it at the end of the year and make it successful regardless. Space Invaders. They made the first admission licensed arcade for home visual consoles, and Atari sold 1.25 million versions of Space Invaders by 1980 at the same time. The Space Invaders proved to be the next goal. Atari was able to all out areas, including a crash in 1977 that cost things. Much smaller than 1983 crash, yes, but I'm getting ahead of myself with that thing. With the Atari 2600 now fine stuff, they started to see, and Space Invaders becoming a success. They started to see how most of the games were. They consumed a game with that. Bushnell continued. In 1976, Atari released Breakup. Well, one of the very first classic game and just break blocks. It was developed by 2 people who later for monogamy, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. That could be later found would be Apple. Breakup proved another success along with Space Invaders. Look at this. In 1977, Bushnell founded another company. By the way, the name Nolan Bushnell sounded familiar to any of you guys, it's not because of Atari, but it's because of something completely else.
This is the place for you and your friends. This is the place where the party never ends. It's the good time place, everyone agrees. When you're hungry for fun, it's Chuck E. Cheese. Chuck E. Cheese, Chuck E. Cheese. When you're hungry for fun, it's Chuck E. Cheese.
It's a good time place that's sure to please.
When you're hungry for fun, it's Chuck E. Cheese. When you're hungry for fun, it's Chuck E. Cheese.
Yep, Chuck E. Cheese. Bushnell found also, so maybe not in Charlie's episode, but most people should know more as a founder of Chuck E. Cheese at that same time. And made sure the first restaurant arcade unit was actually founded in 1977 in San Jose, California. After releasing the VCS, Atari will have more programmers to help launch titles. They also into time, Ray Kassar was made as president. However, Kassar's influence on Atari soon to grow in 1978. Leads a conflict between Bushnell and one of the visionaries. Among other concerns, the direction that Kassar was taking the company, Bushnell cautioned Warner that they needed time to innovate the home console market. It couldn't just simply release games to the VCS like a music business. In 1978, Warner met with Bushnell told the ads saying this had produced how to make BCS units that and Atari's consumer vision was of a major loss. How Kassar's marketing plan, along with the initial hit of Space Invaders, led to some things. Warner removed Bushnell as its chairman in 1978. Bushnell refused to let the company steer the company in his own ways. He was hired as a career consultant though. He left the company that same year and moved to Cheese, where his old buddy Ted Dabney has also come around now. Now it's time to see how Ray Kassar had on the company. After Bushnell's departure, Ray Kassar implemented significant changes to the workplace culture. Beforehand, everybody had sort of a lax identity to each other. Now, he wanted a more serious, more esoteric way of getting things done. He described the representations as spoiled brats and prima donnas. The changes were signalized tensions of Atari, who used the freedom to develop their own titles. One example being Superman in 1979, tying with the movie of the same name. They also made another game called Adventure, which also became successful too at the same time. Even though Atari was mainly, they were still a technology company first and foremost, and Warner Communications wanted to express that with home computers. Developing the first episode of home computers that year in the 1970s with the Atari 400 and 800 8-bit computers. For development, they managed to find two sweet spots in the area after Commodore went to the area. Finding these things came around after the first Atari 2600 had already proven to be a success in the workplace. After Nolan Bushnell was ousted, Atari engineer Jay Mania was tasked to create a display of a Atari computer consisting of two chips, making it all more consistent than the last. The CT chips provides and background graphics. But to reduce the load of the main CPU, and video loading registers and buffering dedicated lines, they made sure the content would work regardless of anything else. And made sure to manage to find two sweet spots for the new computers. A low-end version Intel was Candy and a higher-end machine called Colleen. And then two of Atari's secretaries. Atari marketed Colleen as the main computer, while Candy as a video game machine or a hybrid game console. They made sure both at least work out well, and at least basic necessities were made, and the disk space was on the way. Make a keypad to make sure that everything would go differently. Televisions at the time were not only one print, so they added more inputs than one to add things. Even though this to meet the FCC requirements, both machines were built with cast aluminum shields forming a partial Faraday cage. With the various components screwed into the internal framework, this resulted in a sturdy computer at its advantage of manufacturing expense and complexity. The FCC ruled that Atari were making it more sizable holes in the case, which would allow RF leakage. This would mean expansion slots for all cars in the case. Instead, Atari designed the SIO computer bus to help out. The system dated for changing multiple configurations afterwards. They were both released in 1979 and they both seemed to do okay enough. Even though They one. First, they had the also around as we move into the 1980s with some changes afterwards.
I'd like an Atari 2600 system, please, and everything that goes with it.
Everything? You sure you want everything?
I want everything.
Now you get a new low price, up to $30 in rebate offers, and a free pack.
Is that everything?
It's not everything. You can get nearly 300 different cartridges.
300?
That's nothing.
It's something.
But it's not everything. Soon there'll be a voice module, trackball, remote control joysticks, and a computer keyboard.
It's amazing.
It's amazing, but it's not everything.
It's not everything.
Soon there'll be educational games, too.
Is that everything?
That's everything, for now.
For now?
The Atari 2600.
Now get up to $30 in rebate offers, plus a free Pac-Man.
And moving into the 80s, the VCS still lacked a system-selling game. One of interested Kassar a home conversion unit of tight space. After facing Invaders they asked if they could finally make a version of it to sell off. However, competition was soon around, and although Atari did finally Space Marine in 1981 for the console in 1980 for Atari 2600, after the success of the first game, they asked continuously to bring it in. Until 1980, Atari VCS was the only real programmable console on the market. That changed in 1980 when Mattel brought in the Intellivision to the market. Intellivision was more advanced than the Atari 2600. It had different game and main differences. It says, in 1980, Namco introduced the next big arcade game boom with Pac-Man, becoming the biggest success for them afterwards. Atari wanted to secure the rights afterwards Pac-Man, and on the VCS or Atari 2600 in that case. They already got to development Pac-Man, but to briefly summarize it, they acquired the rights for it afterwards. I think implementation wanted to make the thing much more regular wafers, but the game eventually did become their first big hit in 1982, despite being a critical flop with the marketplace. They were ready to make the successor for the Atari 2600 around the same time.
Arcade players, get ready. The new Atari 5200 Super System is here. With a controller so advanced it plays arcade. Graphics so real it looks arcade. With arcade hits you can't play on any other system. No other home video system can touch it. The new Atari 5200 Super System. It's as good as you are, maybe even better. Next time.
The successor for the Atari 2600 was of course given the Atari 5200. With the following release of the video computer system, Atari made sure the 5200 would, Atari would want to make it more of a digital upgrade. However, they also decided not to make it backward compatible with the Atari 2600, which is ironic since most of the companies did make the games compatible with Atari 2600 games. I just find that funny how they did that anyway, or without getting sued. The Atari 2600 was not, however, was named Super Stella by Atari 200 during development. And it was given how it ended up. In 1981, they designed an system under the codename Pong, or personal arcade machine, with a controller that does arcade instead of itself. In 1972, it was during the consumer show, they planned to show it up. Atari unveiled Pong for the first time, and actually was a super game and made home. A voice synchronized module that trackball was added to make releases. In October of 1982, the 5200 began to appear on store shelves for a retail price of $269.95. The console had an initial limited retail run, only becoming nationwide in 1983 at the same time. However, it failed to get the game crashed traction almost immediately. Problems were already starting to come around for the console. So one main issue was the fact that they couldn't play 5200, was that it was 2600 games. making people question why to buy this thing if you can't play all 2600 games. Another thing that was an issue was its overall size. Right. The large size made the console look bulky, and although it had a control, space for controls and back units, it's almost like you could store anything in this thing. It was gigantic. Who makes consoles this big? The controller also was another issue entirely. While it did have innovations like a pause, start, and reset button, going for the same control scheme as other competitors like the Intellivision and the ColecoVision at the same time. Another main issue with the joystick is that it was made with a different style than others, making it feel unresponsive compared to the Atari 2600s, which is more soft and more cool-headed approach. Not only that, but these controllers had an odd way of holding it too. You had to hold it with one arm and have your thumb do all the tasks on the other arms. This is unlike an underlying controller where you hold it with one arm and basically both arms, and you have basically all the buttons with you at full access. Yes. It didn't really seem to work, and unfortunately, the hardware issues was not there. By July, Atari end of the year, Atari went out. However, they continue to make more games. They couldn't stop themselves when they seemed to pick up another game after Atari 100's flop. That being E.T. for the Atari.
Hello? Somebody out there? E.T. Video game?
It's coming soon, only from Atari. The video game that lets your family help E.T. get home. But only if you have an Atari video game system at home.
E.T. was the biggest movie at the time, and although I mentioned at the time, this time I do have to go more into detail, unlike Pac-Man. Atari negotiated advice from Steven Spielberg to get rights. The game program was programmed by Howard Scott Warshaw over a 5-week period to meet deadline that same to holiday season. They had to work in crunch time just to make it at least work and at least make it go fast. By the time they finally had it out, though, unlike Pac-Man, E.T. was a commercial failure. And E.T. also bombed heavily in the marketplace. Not only that, but later on, Atari took up all their own sold units to a New Mexico landfill afterwards. Leading to what may consider the beginning crash in 1983. Now, if you guys have seen the episode of the crash, you know for a fact Atari was not the main cause of the crash entirely. However, it does stand within reason to see why this whole impact seemed to happen. By the end of the year, despite these losses, Atari was still number 1 in the video game market, getting over Japan. But unfortunately, in crash would see Warner's price stock slid from 60% to 20% with Atari. And unfortunately, things only seemed to get worse for Atari afterwards. And unfortunately, it didn't. Unfortunately, we'll have to look into how they went downhill even more after the break.
You want games? Jaguar's got fast 3D 64-bit games. You want slow, flat games? No. Slow is for turtles, flat is for boards, fast and 3D is for games. Jaguar games. So scary you'll cry like a whimpering fool. But you won't feel like a fool because the games won't be flat and slow, flat, slow, flat, slow. Heard enough and get fast in 3D. Games that are now playing, games that are coming soon. Games that get a 10 because they've got a good beat and you can dance to them. You want fast 3D games? Here's an idea. Atari Jaguar, 64 bits, $159. Yeah, $159. Do the math. Let's see what this TV can do.
Welcome back. By the end of 1983, Warner's stock price has fallen from 60% to 20%. Well, Atari finally started to see and finally fall behind place. The game crash unfortunately hobbled all of Atari's failures afterwards. mainly still conflicted due to the releases of Pac-Man and E.T. Hey, the Atari and Texas industry in 1983 and due to the price for Commodore. 1984, Atari, as far as Atari wanted to announce that they would sell Atari assets of computer electronics and more, including Atari, to a businessman named Jack Jamel for in exchange for roughly taking $240. Jamel would merge these two companies and split them off into two different companies: Atari Corporation and Atari Games. Atari Games would companies would soon take around afterwards. Under Jamel, they focused back. They changed things up and changed more and more with new companies. After being off, they worked on the next console afterwards that was not.
Atari just reinvented the video game with this, the Atari 7800. Incredible, huh? So powerful it plays like the best arcade game with real joysticks, right? So advanced to play super games, computer games no other video game system ever played. Just look at these. It even plays all Atari 2600 games. Great, huh? Hey. Oh, the new Atari 7800. We reinvented the video game.
The Atari Jaguar, the Atari 7800 was the first console of this new era. It was originally meant to be released in 1984. However, due to the crash in 1983, it unfortunately had to be delayed during time. By some measure, it was said to be more powerful than another console at the same time. That being Nintendo system during the same time with manufacturers. Another thing of that was that it was actually backwards compatible with 2600 games, unlike the 5200, which wasn't. This at least have some variety compared to other fans who had gone sound 5200 after it got discontinued in 1984. The console finally released nationwide in 1986. Unfortunately, it premiered too late afterwards. Nintendo's entertainment system had ruled the roost and had saved the game industry. And unfortunately, they will also now be. Unfortunately, the new console that was at least taking around was on Sega's Master System, which was on which is sold to be around 2500 consoles afterwards. The 7800 also lacked afterwards. It was still incorporated a joystick, where other companies would incorporate other designs afterwards. And unfortunately, Jack didn't seem to come down as a bit of a sales boot coming down afterwards. The Atari 7800 was released to be a small version with two joy controllers in 1979. A smaller, more system. However, that didn't seem to matter into the work. After ruling the roost, Atari was now falling down quicker. Under Jamel, they had poor competition in the marketplace. Atari magazine evaluated Jamel as a penny-pinching boss, resulting in poor consumer service and reputation, with production dates limited. The company, however, was also much more open on issues afterwards. It was well to try to develop more game consoles afterwards. They also realized that the computer business was also being beyond by other companies like IBM and Apple and more at the same time. It seemed that Atari was starting to lose out on the console race that they had started all this time. The game crash had made companies more skittish to work with Atari, fearing that most of the companies would actually want to work with a company that was already dying out when we had issues afterwards. Atari ST was in 1985, but it was small enough to at all. However, it was they had to figure out new balance afterwards, including venturing into the handheld console market. Developing a console, instead of naming it the Atari handheld or Atari 10400, they named it to the Atari Lynx. Lynx. They decided instead of going with the numbers, they decided to go with the cats instead. They decided to finally see how this version got. The Lynx was remembered by Epics as the handy game. Two former Amiga designers, RJ Mike McCall and Dave Neal, who were asked by former manager of Amiga Steve Morse to develop a portable game system. Morse worked at Pox, a gaming software company had used to paint games in the belt. Morse's he showed the handy system to the American Consumer Electronics Show in 1989. However, Epics soon had financial difficulties. They stopped partners with the companies. Nintendo and Sega both declined. Nintendo already had their own handheld console, but Sega was trying to establish themselves with Genesis. So instead, Atari came in with a new console that asked if they could do it too. The Lynx was notable for being a few things. For one, it was the first ever home handheld console to have a color backlit screen. It also was sent to be a direct competitor to the Game Boy, being bulkier and easier to drive afterwards. Unfortunately, this led to several issues. For one, the Lynx was bulky and was unwieldy to hold in a pocket. Commercials also had this issue here. Let's have a look at one of them right now.
Hey, Mr. Block, can I go to the bathroom?
2 minutes.
Oh, yes! Cut back! Oh, yes! I'm in the tube! Oh, yes! Oh! All right!
Introducing Lynx from Atari, the color video game you can get away with. Well, sometimes.
After all that, another main issue with the Lynx was that it couldn't hold a charge and battery life was very, very brief, only being roughly around 6 hours battery life. And even though the Lynx did eventually gain some notoriety, when the Game Boy released that same 1989, the Lynx unfortunately was not to work on afterwards, and eventually all the advancements didn't work out. The Lynx was more advanced, but it was also less competitive. It also had to compete with two other consoles, Sega's Game Gear and NEC's Turbo Express, that both were released in 1990/1991 at the same time. The Lynx was seen as a bit bulky and a bit unwieldy to hold. And unfortunately, Atari didn't really see much coverage of the Lynx. They released on a smaller, more compact version of the Lynx afterwards. The Lynx wasn't a terrible system, it was good, but unfortunately, Atari didn't really focus much on the Lynx. And I didn't really see the help in that case when they tried to work with the Lynx. By the 1990s, Atari was slowly but surely starting to lose out, and eventually they had to figure out a way to get innovation back in the names. Atari released the next console afterwards. Was when they said consoles. They developed two consoles. A 32-bit console called the Panther and a 64-bit console called the Jaguar. Both have. The Panther was meant to release next after Super Nintendo and Genesis already previous successes. The Jaguar was a more advanced, high-end system. Both of them were developed by Flair Technology, and founded by Martin Brennan and Johnny Matheson. The team had claimed that they could not only consoles PlayStation and NES, but also cost effective at the same time. Working on the Jaguar progressed faster than expected. Atari wanting to go even further into development with a more expensive console, despite not being tested, decided to go with cancel the Panther entirely in 1991. And instead, they decided to use the Jaguar. With Jaguar instead. However, the Jaguar was eventually tested for a 1993 release date.
To master Kazumi Ninja, and to defeat the evil ninja Gyaku, you need razor-sharp reflexes, superior strength, and a really good cheat sheet with all the death moves.
Kazumi Ninja only on the 64-bit Jaguar.
Yeah!
Now, let's look into the hardware of the Jaguar itself to see what it is. And the Jaguar wasn't good. The hardware of the Jaguar wasn't good at all. For prominence, the controller returned to the pad idea that was back in the 90s. This whole pad idea was not a good idea though. Okay, they had too many buttons. It looked awful. Jaguar also had issues with its own design as well. Notice how every console you have owned right now and cartridges back then, they all had a door that would close where dust wouldn't get in. The Jaguar wasn't missing that door entirely. It was seen to be cheaper, but this caused dust and accumulation again there too, causing issues to work. It gained the nickname the Jag afterwards for everything to go. The launch was first test marketed in 1993 test markets with the new slogan, "Get bit by the Jaguar." Advertisements also changed up too. Like I said in the same video, Atari urged customers to do the math.
Some of you believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits. 3DO is 32 bits. The Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford! With 64 bits, 3D graphics, real-world animation, and lightning speed that you can only get with Jaguar. Which is more advanced? Clifford!
Can you repeat the question?
Jaguar! Jaguar!
Saying that was more advanced than the Sega Genesis, the 3DO, and anything else entirely market. It was a serious dig at consumers in the end, making it more and more enticing to new people who wanted this console, regardless of if it would work or not. The smaller size in the Jaguars, however, the Jaguar said that it was the only 64-bit console and did math. In actuality, it didn't only have 64 gigabytes. Instead, it had 230. Instead, it had more of a different idea. Instead of 232 gigabytes, it's acting up as a 64 gigabytes, but not really true 64 bits at the time 64. And while this was a statement, it also meant views would. For example, with some of the games, compared to other consoles that later, the Jaguar was 64 bits, it didn't look all that much better than what came out on the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. Not only that, but the reviews were poor. Most magazines tore this Jaguar apart, saying that it had unresponsive controls, or the games just didn't show off the console manufacturing. Their version of Doom famously wasn't mute the whole time, having very little sound emulation. They decided to try getting a Jaguar CD. Jaguar CD, unfortunately, also too. It was released in 1985, about roughly a year before 2 years after Jaguar released. It announced that it would try to release afterwards. However, limited track cartridges didn't work. And also, it gained a nickname, the Atari Toilet. Toilet. Yes, I'm serious. That's what its nickname got. That it looked like a toilet. What a fame that for? Not only that, but the Jaguar CD also didn't work a good chunk of time. There have been units that have been stated to not work at all when it came to the Jaguar. A virtual reality headset also was announced too. However, this never got released. By 1986, Jaguar was in 4.5. Atari's Jaguar was already seen as a fit. 150,000 units already been sold. And when the PlayStation 6 came around, Atari had finally realized they say goodbye to the Atari console. Jaguar's last gate would announced that they would finally end the console in 1986. That year would make to decline aftermath. Jaguar. In 1985, Sam Trammell suffered a mild heart attack, forcing him to sit down as Atari's president. His father, Jack Trammell, came back afterwards after he left the company. With the Jaguar being unsuccessful, Atari finally signed the wave of the wait flag of surrender on the consoles. And called it quits after the Jaguar's failure in the marketplace. Despite the Jaguar being a commercial failure, the main reason why Atari went down afterwards was actually due to a series of several lawsuits by profitable investments. With Atari millions of dollars in debt with no way to sell them. In addition, Trammell's family went out of business. In 1988, Atari merged with the company Atari merged with the company GTS. Yes, GTS would eventually Atari was now the company afterwards. The Atari name was managed consumer market entirely with a new market. Trammell founded the company afterwards with a whole division. While the Atari Games company was still, the Atari coin operations was still doing well enough, Atari, the company itself, had unfortunately now lost everything and was now at the bottom of the tree chain. In 1998, Atari was soon sold off to another company named Hasbro Interactive for $5 million. The transition also meant the intellectual brands and intellectual property rights to Hasbro Interactive. They were largely used as a basis for the game releases. In January 2021, Hasbro Interactive is sold at Infogrames. Nowadays, Infogrames is known as Atari. We acquired the name Atari Interactive in 2003. We named it. Probably after realizing Infogrames themselves isn't a great name. I may have been the first and the innovators. Unfortunately, being an innovator like this also made them a somewhat lost leader. And unfortunately, Atari's story is probably one of the saddest stories in video game history. After being the first ones and doing it relatively well with companies like pumping out with many different games afterwards, the 2600. And although it was slow at first, it became the benchmark for how many big punches. However, thanks to the failures of both Pac-Man and E.T., and Warner Brothers has sold Atari off, but they went off afterwards. Atari, they had to scratch and claw their way back into the video game industry in the 80s after the whole business came through. However, the failure of the 7800 made poorly. The Lynx was fine. Lynx, although with a decent system, was not properly supported by Atari and failed in the marketplace after the Game Boy. And unfortunately, it was discontinued in 1985 to focus more on the Jaguar. And the Jaguar, unfortunately, also bombed the marketplace too. The marketing was too aggressive. It was a full 64-bit console at best, and Atari and it also is discovered that the Atari Jaguar, they have a collar on it. If a collar had been put onto it, it would have at least had someone to equip it. But because Atari wanted to show that the Jaguar come hell or high water, no collar was put on it, and unfortunately Jaguar came out. They can be bought by Hasbro Interactive at the same time. Today, Atari sits in a former shell of its former self. They still make games, but the name is more remote as fond memories than anything else. And unlike Sega, Atari is not in the same place as they were 40 years ago. As we come up to more than 50 years of Atari being a company and 50 years of the 2600 being unreleased, it's important to note that Atari's wounds are just sad. The story ends here. For me personally. Atari is still around, but the name and recognition is no longer there. Makes it all for... Again, sorry to end it on download, but thanks for watching on the podcast. If you like to watch whatever this thing came on, watch on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you watch podcasts. Please, please come follow on Patreon. For $15 a month, you get to watch this podcast for all you can enjoy. And please come listen to me follow me on Blue Sky. With all that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.